They shoved her face first into the dirt, laughing as she hit the ground hard. Grit streaked her cheek. Mud clung to her sleeve. No rank stitched to shield her, no ally nearby to intervene, only 4 cadets looming over a woman they decided didn't belong. What they didn't realize was that Navy SEALs don't need insignia to own a space, and she hadn't come here seeking validation. She'd arrived to observe, nothing more, until they pushed her too far. When she finally rose, she gave them a lesson they'd remember long after bruises faded, a glimpse of what true combat looks like when you provoke someone who's already endured worse. Before we reveal how Lieutenant Commander Rhea Maddox turned a training yard into a master class in discipline, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because this story isn't about falling down, it's about what happens when arrogance mistakes quiet for weakness. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but puddles still mirrored the gray sky across the gravel lot. Boot prints had become shallow craters. Pools of rainwater caught the fading light and returned it cold. A chill breeze drifted through the backfield of Redstone Academy's training grounds, weaving between climbing rigs and obstacle lanes slick with mud. Cadets in sweat-soaked fatigues sprinted between stations, shouting orders with that desperate energy only recruits can muster. A whistle split the air. The supervising sergeant barked out times from beside the rope tower. "You're not racing each other," he called. "You're racing whatever kills you for real." And beneath the shadow of a decommissioned observation post near the far pull-up rig, a lone woman stood watching. She was older than the others, mid to late 30s maybe, and her gear didn't match their standard issue. Contractor fatigues, tan boots, black undershirt, no insignia, no rank tab. A clipboard rested under one arm, black gloves hung from a carabiner on her belt, a folded cap in her hand. She didn't speak, didn't pace, didn't even jot a note. She simply watched, she kept watching, and the cadets began to notice. "Who's the civvy?" one muttered, the smirk barely hidden behind his breath. "Probably some logistics clerk," another replied. "Saw her by admin earlier. Been standing there like she's waiting for a ride." 2 younger recruits jogged by on cooldown, slowing just enough to sneak a glance, not long enough to draw a reprimand, but enough to feed curiosity. "She doesn't belong here," one whispered, not quite low enough. The woman didn't react. Her gaze drifted across the training yard, steady, assessing, detached. Then a cadet jogged a little too close, his boot striking beside hers on purpose. A splash of muddy water climbed her pant leg to the shin. A few quiet laughs followed. She still didn't move. Her eyes dropped briefly to the stain, then returned to the obstacle course ahead. The whispers began to grow. "Lost, ma'am? Sure this isn't the PX? Careful. Mud's deeper than it looks. Hate to see you twist an ankle." By the monkey bars, a group turned to watch. One of them, a broad-shouldered blonde with that cocky grin that probably saved him in school fights, stepped forward. "You with maintenance or something?" he asked, grinning wide. "If you're here for inventory, we're missing a few dumbbells by the range." Still, she said nothing. He waited for a reaction, got none, then laughed and turned back toward his friends. "Guess not." She shifted away from the tower, walking the dirt path between rig lanes, every step deliberate and quiet, too controlled for standard-issue boots. As she passed 2 cadets lingering by the low crawl tunnel, one slid his foot out, just barely. Her boot clipped it. She lost balance for half a heartbeat, one knee sinking into damp gravel. Dust and mud smeared instantly across her uniform. From behind came a snort and a mocking voice. "Oops, didn't see you there." She didn't say a word, just stood up, calm and composed. Her gloved hand brushed down her pant leg. smearing the dust into darker streaks along the fabric. Then she turned her head, not fully, only enough for one sharp eye to meet his. For a heartbeat, the cadet froze. Her look wasn't angry, not even irritated, but it carried the quiet precision of a blade resting against skin. Not cutting, just reminding him it could. Then she turned away, continuing toward the pull-up rigs with the same steady pace. Behind her, the whispers dimmed, though the disrespect hadn't vanished. Not yet. 4 cadets at the center of the yard still laughed, still convinced she was nothing but a soft civilian with mud on her boots. They didn't realize that her silence wasn't submission. It was a challenge they'd just accepted without knowing. Training continued around them, cadets grunting across wet monkey bars, slipping, falling, puffing up for the instructors. Whistles cut through the noise, but at the far end, the supervising sergeant's focus had wandered. He leaned lazily against a post, scribbling notes, leaving the group to police itself. That's when the 4 decided to break off. They weren't the strongest or the fastest, but they carried that loud kind of confidence that fools mistake for authority. The stocky blonde from earlier pointed toward the woman by the rig lane. His friends followed his gaze. "She's still here?" he muttered, probably waiting on her ride. The wiry one with sharp features laughed. "Nah, look at her, standing like she runs the place. Let's fix that." They drifted closer, slow enough not to draw eyes, quick enough to box her in. The mud clung heavy to their boots as they spread out near the pull-up rigs, closing the distance. Up close, she looked smaller than they'd expected, lean, quiet, the kind of build they thought they could shove aside without consequence. "Afternoon, ma'am," the blonde said, his fake politeness thick with mockery. "You lost? This isn't admin territory." She stayed silent, shifting her weight slightly, one hand resting by her hip, eyes locked on the rig ahead. "You hear me?" He pushed, stepping closer. "This is a warrior's yard, not a spot for, what even are you, logistics?" One of the others snorted, grinning. "Doesn't matter," one of them muttered. "She doesn't belong here." Her silence held steady, deliberate, like a wall they couldn't climb. It only fueled their arrogance. The wiry cadet leaned in, his voice dripping with mockery. "Careful, boys," he sneered. "She might start taking notes on us." Laughter broke out, sharp, mean, echoing across the yard. Then the balance shifted. The stocky one stepped forward and shoved her. Not playful, not teasing, just force. Both hands slammed into her shoulder, sending her straight into the dirt. She hit hard, gravel tearing at her palms, mud streaking across her sleeve and cheek. For a moment, the only sound was the impact. Then came the laughter, loud, crude, unrestrained. "Look at her, right in the mud," one barked. "Should have brought a mop. Bet she's wishing she stayed off this field." Across the yard, the supervising sergeant looked up. His eyes narrowed, lingered a second, then dropped back to his notes. He chose to pretend it wasn't happening. "Cadet games," he told himself. "They'll sort it out." The woman stayed still for a moment, her hand pressed to the ground. Her fingers brushed against something half buried in the gravel, a trampled, mud-soaked training roster. She caught a glimpse of the header before it fell apart. Asterisk Advanced Close Quarters Combat. Instructor certification required. That's why she was here, to evaluate whether Redstone Academy's close quarters program still met the standards command had questioned for months. The cadets didn't know that. The sergeant turning away didn't know that. But she did, and now she didn't need to see any more. Slowly, she stood. No shouting, no anger, just the quiet, deliberate movement of someone brushing mud from her uniform as if nothing had happened. Her gaze lifted, locking on the 4 cadets. "You should be careful about what you think you know," she said evenly. The tone wasn't a threat or a warning, but the calmness in it made the air tighten. It unsettled them more than if she'd yelled. The wiry one smirked anyway, forcing a laugh. "Did you hear that?" he said. "She's warning us. How cute. She's lucky we're not allowed to rough up civilians," one of them sneered. Their laughter followed, but it wasn't as confident now. The edges frayed, the certainty fading. She didn't flinch, didn't back away. She just stood there, mud on her cheek, dirt streaking her sleeve, eyes locked forward and steady. The cadets mistook that stillness for surrender. They thought they'd won. What they didn't realize was that they'd just built the stage for their own humiliation. The rhythm of the yard slowed. Cadets who'd been timing sprints or counting pull-ups began to drift closer. Boots scuffing into a rough half-circle around the rigs. There was no order, no whistle, just that invisible pull of tension drawing them in. The 4 who had shoved her stood in the center, still laughing, though their voices strained now, forced, trying to convince themselves it was still a joke. "Come on, ma'am," one jeered, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve in mockery. "Show us a regulation push-up, or is it yoga day?" Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Another chimed in, louder, making sure everyone heard. "Bet she's never even touched a rifle. Logistics doesn't count as combat." The wiry one leaned forward, smirk curling wider. "Maybe she can give us a class on stacking crates." That got more laughter, meaner, sharper, the kind that feeds on an audience. But the woman didn't react. She didn't even glance their way. Instead, her eyes drifted to their stances, the way the stocky one leaned too far over his heels, the wiry one's clenched fist trembling slightly, the tall one's legs spread too wide, giving away every motion before it came. She didn't need to say a thing. To her, their mistakes stood out like cracks in glass, but the cadets read her silence differently. "She's scared," the tall one muttered loud enough for the crowd. "Can't even look us in the eye," the wiry one added. The stocky one grinned and stepped closer. "Don't worry, ma'am," he mocked. "We'll take it easy on you. You can tap out when you're done." A low murmur rippled through the crowd, some amused, others uneasy. A few cadets shifted, realizing this was going too far, but none stepped in. The sergeant on the far side of the field kept his head down, pretending not to notice. Her breathing stayed calm, hands loose at her sides. Only her eyes moved, one quick glance at the dirt still clinging to her sleeve. And then, quietly, something inside her shifted. She wasn't standing in Redstone's yard anymore. She was back on the wet sand of Coronado, second week of Bud S., the Pacific surf pounding her ribs, instructors screaming until their throats bled, the mud pit cold and merciless, her teammates cursing under their breath, daring her to quit, to ring the bell and end the pain. The lesson had been burned into her long ago. The loudest ones are always the weakest. Her jaw set, but she said nothing. The wiry cadet took her silence as surrender. "What's the matter?" he mocked. "Cat got your tongue?" He stepped closer, the circle quieting around him, every eye waiting for her reaction. But none came. Her silence pressed heavier than a shout, a weight that unsettled him for just an instant. He rocked back on his heels, then forced a laugh to hide it. The others moved in tighter, their shadows stretching across her boots in the late afternoon light. What had started as a shove in the dirt was shifting into something else, something charged. No longer a cheap joke, but a confrontation. The tension crackled, carried on the wind, and every cadet watching could feel it. The laughter faded, replaced by a nervous quiet, the sharp kind that comes right before a fight. Yet through it all, she stood motionless, mud streaked across her sleeve, posture calm, expression unreadable. The only warning she gave was the kind that hides inside stillness. Then one of them stepped too close. The tall cadet, frustrated she hadn't flinched or folded, grabbed a fistful of her sleeve at the elbow, the way you'd yank a teammate back into line. But that single touch changed everything. It wasn't words anymore. It was force, and between his grip tightening and his next breath, the moment broke. She moved, not in panic but with pure, trained precision. Her left arm dropped, her right foot pivoted, her center rotated in one fluid arc, and suddenly his wrist was twisted, locked, his own weight dragging him down. He hit the ground hard, breath leaving him in a single, harsh exhale, one knee buried in the dirt, the other leg sprawled uselessly behind him. Her hold was exact, firm, but not cruel, controlled, measured. A second passed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Boots scuffed backward in a hurry. She released him as quickly as she'd taken him down. He stayed there, stunned, chest heaving. She took one step back, hands low, stance easy, like she'd simply adjusted her footing. When she finally spoke, her tone was level, quiet, unshaken. "Walk away," she said evenly, "before you embarrass yourselves any further." The cadet on the ground scrambled to his feet, face flushed deeper than his uniform. His eyes burned, not from pain, but from something sharper, humiliation. Rage that he hadn't seen it coming, and worse, that she hadn't even tried. The stocky one looked between his shaken friend and the woman, fists tightening. "No," he growled, stepping forward. "You don't get to do that and just walk away." She didn't move. The wiry cadet joined in, voice trembling at the edge. "Think you're tough? You just got lucky." That's all that was, luck. But the words couldn't hide the crack in his tone. Still, the three of them advanced, wounded pride driving them forward. Around them, the crowd thickened. Cadets who'd hung back before now leaned in, silent, eyes locked. It was no longer training. It was something else, a test, a spectacle, and no one was about to stop it. She gave no signal, no stance, no threat. Yet something in her eyes shifted, not fury, not defiance, just focus, readiness. Her gaze dropped to the ground between them, to the same dirt where they'd shoved her moments ago, to the dust still clinging to her sleeve. It wasn't shame anymore. It was a line. Cross it, and find out. They didn't see it. They stepped forward. And that's when it began. The stocky cadet moved first, the same one who'd shoved her before. He lunged low, trying to grab her at the waist like it was a playground scuffle. His boots pounded through the dirt, head down, arms wide, all muscle, no discipline. She waited until the last second. Then she pivoted. In a blur of movement, his momentum betrayed him. She hooked his shoulder, redirected, and let gravity do the rest. It wasn't a throw, it was a correction. He hit the ground face first with a heavy slap, mud splattering across his arms as he sprawled like a stunned animal. Gasps tore through the circle. This time, no one laughed. The wiry one came next, faster, meaner, fist cocked high. He swung at her head, all speed and anger, no control. She ducked clean beneath it, her elbow driving hard into his ribs, short, brutal, efficient. He folded instantly, choking out a breathless grunt, clutching his chest. She didn't follow through. Didn't hit again, just gave him a small controlled push, and he dropped beside the first, coughing and wide-eyed. A few cadets near the equipment shed edged back. Among them stood a staff sergeant, older, seasoned. He saw everything. His hand drifted to his whistle, then stopped. He looked toward the supervising sergeant still scribbling in his notebook, hesitated, then lowered his hand and turned toward the barracks. Later, that hesitation would be written up, dissected, criticized. But in that moment it meant one thing. She was on her own. The third cadet hesitated, a square-jawed kid with more muscle than control, then charged. He came in from behind, arms wide, trying to trap her in a bear hug. She let him think it worked. Just as his arms locked, she dropped low, knees bent, spine coiled tight, then exploded upward, driving her hips through his center of gravity. He was airborne before he realized what happened, and a second later, flat on his back with a heavy thud that sent dust rising. He groaned, dazed, one hand reaching toward the sky, as if that might steady the spinning. That left one, the tall cadet she'd already dropped once. He didn't rush this time. He stood there breathing hard, watching his 3 teammates writhing in the mud. "What the hell?" he muttered. "How'd she—" Then he caught her eyes, not angry, not proud, just waiting. Something inside him cracked. He yelled and lunged. She didn't dodge. She met him head-on. His arm came up to swing, but her hand shot forward first, catching, turning, twisting inward, redirecting his own momentum until his body folded over hers. In 1 second, his shoulder was locked. His arm pinned behind his back, his balance gone. "Stop!" he barked, voice cracking. Every eye on the field was on her now. Even the instructors near the path had gone silent. Mud streaked her sleeves. A thin line of blood ran from her knuckles. Her chest rose and fell, not with exhaustion, but with control. Precision took effort. Violence didn't. She hadn't thrown a single wild strike. No broken noses, no split lips, just clean technique, pure discipline. She released the cadet's arm and stepped back. He stumbled forward, fell to his knees, gasping. Her voice cut the air, quiet but absolute. "Enough." This time, no one laughed. The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was recognition. Like a room realizing, all at once, that the rules had never been what they thought. Near the back, a prior service Marine finally whispered what the others were beginning to suspect. He'd seen this before, at Camp Pendleton, in instructors who never needed to yell, the precision, the control, the calm authority. "Oh, hell," he breathed. "She's not a contractor." But he didn't finish, because by then every cadet knew they were staring at something they didn't understand. Not a civilian, not a consultant, something else entirely. She didn't speak, just adjusted the wrist of her glove and waited. Now they were the ones uncertain. The woman standing in the center of that mud-streaked drill yard hadn't come to prove herself. But she had anyway. For nearly 10 seconds, no one moved. The 4 cadets who'd mocked her still lay sprawled in the dirt, muddy, panting, silent. The rest stood frozen, eyes wide, realizing what they'd witnessed. Then a sharp voice shattered the stillness. "What the hell is going on here?" Colonel Vaughn, broad-shouldered, commanding, strode into the yard, flanked by 2 junior officers. His presence carried more weight than his rank alone. He scanned the scene, the disheveled cadets, the half-circle of onlookers, and the calm woman standing at the center. In one glance he saw everything and nothing at once. "Who started this?" he barked. All 4 cadets pointed in unison. "She attacked us," one shouted. "We were just talking," another added. "She overreacted. We didn't even touch her." The lies tumbled over each other. Vaughn's brow furrowed. His eyes shifted to the woman. She didn't defend herself, didn't argue, just stood there, mud on her sleeves, one hand scraped raw, face unreadable. Something in her stance caught his attention. Not defiant, not aggressive, just exact. Back straight, chin level, boots planted shoulder-width apart, like she belonged there more than any of them. "Who are you?" he asked, voice low but firm. She reached inside her jacket, pulled out a laminated contractor pass, and handed it to him without a word. He read aloud. Assigned logistics consultant, referred by joint command. His tone softened slightly. As he spoke, she raised a hand to wipe a streak of mud from her cheek, and that's when he saw it. Just beneath her cuff, a faint gold outline, a trident, faded but unmistakable. Vaughn's expression changed. He looked at her again, truly looked. The way she stood, the control in her movements, the silence that commanded more respect than shouting ever could. "Wait," he said slowly. "What's your name?" Her voice came steady and calm. "Lieutenant Commander Rhea Maddox." The name dropped into the air like weight on glass. A few cadets gasped quietly. An instructor in the back straightened, recognition flashing in his eyes. Vaughn blinked once, recalibrating everything he thought he understood. "I've read your file," he said softly. "You're—" She gave a small nod. He didn't need to finish. He turned back to the cadets, face hard as iron. "You four just assaulted a Navy SEAL combat veteran," he said, voice low but cutting. "One with more time under fire than all of you combined have in this academy. What do you have to say for yourselves?" They said nothing. One cadet finally murmured, She didn't even fight back at first." "She didn't have to," another whispered. Vaughn faced her again. "You could have broken bones." "Didn't need to," she replied evenly. He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once, deeply. Not just respect, understanding. "Thank you, Commander," he said quietly. She didn't respond, but the yard didn't need her to. Everyone there already understood who she was, and who she wasn't. She wasn't a civilian, she wasn't a contractor, she was a Navy SEAL, and they had shoved her into the dirt. Colonel Vaughn didn't need to raise his voice. When he turned back to the crowd, each word landed like a gavel. "This woman is no logistics officer," he said clearly. "She's Lieutenant Commander Rhea Maddox, retired Navy SEAL, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Silver Star, dozens of classified deployments. She's bled for this flag longer than most of you have worn a uniform." The words spread across the field like fire through dry grass. Cadets turned to each other in stunned silence. Whispers built in ripples. Rhea didn't move. She didn't even flinch at the sound of her own name. She simply stood there, hands folded loosely at her waist, expression unreadable. She'd been through worse than this, far worse. But for the 4 who had shoved her, who'd laughed, taunted, grabbed, and swung, this wasn't just embarrassment anymore. It was institutional humiliation. The stocky one, still hunched from where she'd taken him down, lowered his eyes. His voice came small. "Ma'am, I didn't know." Colonel Vaughn didn't let it pass. "You didn't know?" he shot back. "No, you assumed. You saw someone quiet, older. No combat tab, no weapon. And instead of showing discipline, you showed off." No one spoke. The wiry cadet swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. We thought she was just a contractor," he stammered. Vaughn turned sharply toward him. "You think a uniform defines worth? That a patch makes you untouchable? She's seen more in 1 year than you'll see in 10, and she didn't need a rifle to teach you what discipline looks like." Then he faced her again. "Commander Maddox," he said, "do you want to press charges?" She met his eyes. "No?" He hesitated. "No?" She shook her head once. "They've already learned more from this than any punishment could teach them." Her tone wasn't forgiving. Just final? Finished? She didn't need cuffs, because she wasn't the one buried in shame anymore. Vaughn nodded slowly. Understood. He turned back to the cadets. Voice crisp and deliberate. You four will report to your commanding officers for immediate disciplinary review. You'll scrub every inch of this yard before sunset, and tomorrow morning you'll stand before the honor board and tell them exactly what happened, word for word. They nodded quickly, shame written across their faces. Rhea didn't look at them. She didn't need to. The rest of the crowd had already started to scatter, whispers rippling through the ranks as the weight of what they'd witnessed settled in. Some avoided her gaze. Others watched her with something new, respect not earned by rank or force, but by restraint, skill, and quiet authority. She adjusted her sleeve, covering the faint trident again, and finally moved. Calm, methodical, brushing the mud from her fatigues one last time. Vaughn lingered, studying her. "We're lucky to have you here," he said quietly. She didn't answer. She didn't have to, because that moment wasn't about who she was. It was a reminder of what kind of silence should never be underestimated. Most of the cadets had already dispersed, sent to clean gear, report to instructors, or just walk off the shame still clinging to their boots. But she stayed behind. Lieutenant Commander Rhea Maddox crouched near the center of the drill lane, not to rest, not to brood, but to clean. She pulled a small cloth from her pouch and began wiping the caked mud from her boots, one careful stroke at a time. No hurry, no anger, just quiet focus, the same kind that had carried her through missions these cadets would never even hear about. Colonel Vaughn hadn't left either. He took a few steps closer, stopping just behind her. "They'll never forget this lesson," he said softly. She didn't look up. "Neither will I," she replied. Oh, there was no pride in it, no bitterness, just truth. She stood, giving her boots a light tap against the gravel. The mud was gone, her sleeves neat again, gloves tucked back under her belt. Her uniform was still damp, her knuckles scraped, but her bearing was unshaken. No one would ever mistake her again. Rhea glanced once toward the open field, the same stretch of dirt where they'd mocked and shoved her, and this time it didn't mark defeat. It marked their fall. She turned, walked off the yard without looking back. Not one cadet lifted their head. Because in 10 minutes they hadn't just seen a fight. They'd witnessed something far rarer, what quiet power really looks like.